Nice.
Watch out for
Okay, we're going to start now for real. Okay, thank you everyone for coming out today. It's really nice to see so many friendly faces in one place. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jaluague, and I'm on the North American Executive Board of the Students for Liberty. Before I get into the day's events and telling you what SFL is all about, it's important for me to tell you why this event is happening in the first place. And in order to do that, you need to know something about me. And if there's one thing that you need to know about me, is that I don't make my bed in the morning, ever. Ever since I moved out of my parents' place when I was 17, never made my bed, and I don't plan on changing that. And I know there are people here in this room on both sides, pro and anti bed making. And I don't need to start like a fight here, but I mean, so I understand the arguments for both sides. On the one hand, if you make your bed in the morning, it feels nice when you get into the bed like at night. It forms good habits, right? But on the other hand, you save a lot of time if you don't make your bed. At least in my experience. I could be doing so many more things. I didn't sleep. That's really important. If I lived to the next 100 years, I calculated that's literally 1,000 hours of extra sleep. Yeah, sleep a lot. So I call myself a libertarian because I believe that people should do as they please as long as they don't hurt other people. And arguably you can say maybe making your bed makes your place look messy. It sends the wrong message or whatever, but ultimately that has no bearing on anyone else's life, right? And coming full circle, this event is meant to introduce you to the idea of libertarianism, and that is the core tenet. Do unto others as long as you don't hurt anyone else. So this conference is one of 5 that's happening around North America today. and one of 24 that is happening between October and November. And I hope that in the topics that we're going to talk about today, it will introduce you to the principles of freedom. So we're going to talk about electoral reform, drug policy, gender equality, and law. And by the way, I studied biochemistry. I'm not a poli-sci major. Most people think so, just because I do things like this. But the reason why I care so much is because the type of regulations that are imposed, that really affects the work that I do in the future as a future scientist. And so that's why I do what I do. And by the end of today, I'm sure that you'll see the connection between the philosophy of liberty and the connection to your life and your future career. And I'd really like to thank our speakers for coming here today, for sharing their experiences with us. Just knowing that what they do, it makes me hopeful because there are people out there who are willing to speak up and change the future for the better. A lot of times, as libertarians, we always complain about the new tax code or what have you, but it's taking action. That's what makes real change. And so on to what Students for Liberty is. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, and it's run by students for students, but ultimately it benefits everyone. It started 7 years ago as a conference of 100 people in New York, but since then it's grown into one of the largest international conferences in the world for students that are known as ISLC, the International Students for Liberty Conference. And in your folders, some of you have a placard that talks about it. For people coming outside from the US, it's actually free to attend. So I highly recommend it. It's always a highlight of my year. SFL is not a chapter-based or membership-based organization, but instead we're a network of pro-liberty students. We cover all 6 inhabited continents. We're still working on Antarctica, but I'm pretty hopeful. There are currently 1,300 groups and more than 800 leaders spread across the world. And I'll give you a few examples of what our students have done. So some of you may have heard of the Free Brazil movement. The guy who's leading it is an SFL leader. He's 19 years old, and he drew 200,000 people to protest against their current president. And thank you, yeah, it's wonderful. And this happened just in April, actually. And then another example is in Eastern Africa. I saw the registration where they had over 1,000 people coming to, they're interested in these ideas. Like, I mean, it was so hard just drawing 100 people into a room here in Canada. I mean, I can't even imagine what 1,000 people looks like. And I need to say that SFL supports pro-liberty groups and pro-liberty initiatives, but that doesn't necessarily mean libertarian. We'll support any group that promotes freedom for all people. So a lot of clubs do happen to be called Students for Liberty, but we also support clubs that focus on single issues like drug policy or gay rights or economics and free speech. And at SFL, we believe that there are 3 main principles of freedom. The first is economic freedom. That means being able to choose how to provide freedom of life. Second is social freedom. It's free to choose who you associate with. And the third is intellectual freedom. And I think, personally, that's the most important part because everything starts with ideas. And yes, everything starts with ideas, and that's what SFL emphasizes. And as I said before, SFL started as just a one-time conference. They didn't really think they were going to do anything else with it. But now it's become an organization that runs conferences like this throughout the year, and we also have a campus coordinator program, which I'll touch upon later on when we have the student activism panel. And I think, really, that is the main reason why SFL is so successful. So, going on to the schedule now, just so you guys know what's going on. The talks will generally be half an hour, and then we left 15 minutes for Q&A so that you'll have time to ask questions. We have 15-minute breaks in between because nature calls, and also we want you to be able to interact with each other. That's another really important part of conferences like this. And by the way, I know a lot of you in the audience, and I know you're doing awesome things in your community, so don't be shy when you talk to people, tell them about it, because it might be the start of something new, you know? And then we also have a networking discussion group portion, if you notice in your schedule. And this is where you'll be put into small groups so that you can talk about today's speeches, address your concerns, and then we'd like you to write down questions as a group so that because the next session is a speaker panel. And so they're just going to answer your questions in bulk. Lunch will be here. Dinner is going to be served at the social at the St. Regis Bar and Grill, and it's just a few blocks away, so you won't get lost. We have drink tickets for you as well. And yeah, you can stay as long as you want, or you don't have to come at all. It's freedom, right? And yeah, if you have any questions, don't feel free to talk to me. If you don't have anything to say, just say hi anyway. I want to meet you all. And you'll notice that some people have pink star on their name tags. Those are our event volunteers and staff. And that's pretty much all I have to say, I think. Stephen, if you're in this room, did I miss anything? It's probably up there. Okay. I think that's everything. But again, if you have any questions, feel free to talk to me. And now I'd like to invite our partner organizations just for them to tell you what they're up to. And if you want to get involved, yeah, keep in touch with that. My shoe is stuck. Okay, who wants to come up first?
Good morning, everybody. Great to see this crowd with all that rain out there. It's awesome turnout. My name is Phil Johnston. I'm the director of the Vancouver branch of the Canadian Association for Equality. It's a registered charity in Canada, and it's interested in gender equality, and particularly the inequity that men and boys face in society. Now you might be asking yourself, what kind of issues affect men and boys in society? Well, it comes down to men's health, fatherlessness, the underachievement of boys in education, and misandry, which is anti-male hatred in society, just to name a few. And I have plenty of more information at my table, that's just outside the room here if you'd like to learn more. CAFE has branches across Canada. We have them popping up in Calgary, Edmonton, Toronto, Ottawa. And actually Toronto has started the first center of its kind in Canada, the Centre for Men and Families, which is, I believe it's the only place in Canada that provides shelter for men who have been victims of domestic violence. So I just want to end by saying part of our awareness is sponsoring student clubs. We sponsor Student Club SFU Advocacy for Men and Boys. You'll be hearing from Jesse in a few moments. He's the VP of the club. And they have an event tomorrow that Karen will actually be speaking at, Toxic Masculinity and Toxic Femininity. And that's free for all to attend. So I'd just like to say enjoy the conference, have fun everybody, and thank you.
Hi guys, my name is Kimberly. I work for the Fraser Institute. And first of all, I want to say thank you to Students for Liberty for having us all here today and hosting this event. But for those of you who may not be familiar with the Fraser Institute, we're a nonprofit economic research and education organization. The Fraser Institute publishes numerous studies and reports on a variety of public policy topics. We also have been hosting student seminar programs in cities across Canada since 1988. I work in the education group, and I encourage you to all come out to our next seminars. The next seminar that we're having is on the 30th of January, and we're going to be talking about things like the relationship between LNG and First Nations, rethinking the Canadian Health Act, and then looking at Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. We also have some upcoming opportunities for volunteers. If any of you would like to get involved with the Vancouver office of the Fraser Institute, come talk to myself and my colleague. And then of course we have our table out back, so I encourage you to all come by. We have lots of different publications and research, some light reading for the bus home maybe, I don't know. But either way, thank you for having us, and come check us out, ask us any questions you may have.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Derek Straughan, and I'm a lawyer with the Canadian Constitution Foundation. And I'd like to just do something really quickly here. I'm going to Instagram something, so if you guys just all smile. There we go, cool. Now, if anyone objects to that, tell me right now and I won't post it, but I don't think it will during public. So I work for an organization called the Canadian Constitution Foundation, and what we do is we defend individuals against the encroachment of government. So we are involved all over Canada in litigation and education. We do really interesting cases. I've had the opportunity to defend people at the Ontario Court of Appeal because they have been conscientious objectors against the law, and the government decided to crush them. And so I've done that. I've represented raw milk farmers. My colleagues have done all sorts of interesting things. We've been to the Supreme Court many times, and our focus is to give you freedom from the encroachment of government, which means individual liberties. Don't care what you do, what you believe, it doesn't matter to us. We want you to be free of government, and we want you to have economic freedom as well. And to that end, we think that freedom of contract should be protected, and the government should just get out of their lives.
Hi everyone, my name is Siavash. I'm here representing FEE, which is the Foundation for Economic Education. I just graduated from UBC last year. I know some of the people in the crowd are also from UBC or UNBC. So FEE is a think tank, sort of like student outreach organization, which helps spread the ideas of classical liberalism, free markets, free enterprise, a tolerant society, these kinds of ideas, and we try to do it in a way that makes sense to young people in society. So we tackle issues like entrepreneurship. We host conferences about how to best address environmental problems, how to best address economic problems, student debt, that kind of stuff. And we try to address these problems with an angle of limited state, free markets, classical liberalism, individual rights, personal liberties. So please do visit our table in the back. I'll be there. I would love to speak with you more in depth about these kinds of issues. I actually went to a FEE conference in Los Angeles, in Orange County, last June. It was a fantastic time. It was like 100 to 150 people from all over the world, people from Latin America, people from Russia, people from Ukraine, obviously Canadians, people from Toronto even, those kind of people. And it was just a fantastic time, and everyone was just learning from each other. It was a week-long conference. We had fantastic speakers. And if you sign up for our newsletter back at the table that I have, you get the updates on these kinds of events that we have across North America, but mainly in the United States. And there's always obviously travel bursaries available if you decide that you need those. So yeah, please visit me in the back, and we have also free books and various like swag, I guess, to give out. So yeah, looking forward to the conference. Thanks everyone. I could go, yeah.
Okay.
Sure, go ahead.
Great, so welcome everyone, and thanks again to Liz for the exceptional organization bringing this together. It's always wonderful to see everything coming together. So I'm here with the Institute for Liberal Studies, and we're a registered educational charity dedicated to the discussion of classical liberal thought, especially here in Canada. So we encourage discussion and debate through a number of ways, but regarding mostly issues grounded in democracy, rule of law, economic, and personal freedoms. So our mission really is to provide a venue where people can hear, listen, and really be exposed to ideas both from interpersonal basis, either from students to students or students to professors. So we really focus on bringing together leading scholars, policy experts, and discuss issues in a really friendly environment that's able to allow for more questions and analysis and explorations of issues that you can't really in a probably modern day university classroom. But we're very focused on making sure that that's a nonpartisan environment as well. So our seminars focus on themes such as the relationships between economics and government, philosophy and society, as well as environmental policy and social policy. So many of the one-day seminars that we host cover a number of different topics. They're often on university campuses and always offered free of charge. So students, faculty, and general members of the public are invited to attend as well. So in 2013 alone, we had over 1,000 people attend seminars, and that growth has continued. And if I were to explore a little bit about how I became involved, is that I identified as a pretty hard left socialist until I ran into our executive director, Matt Buffett. So I sort of had this idea of what libertarianism was, but I never really knew for sure. And he invited me to come out to a seminar to kind of learn a little bit more. So amongst him and other professors, basically I was exposed to ideas about basically social change, market failure, public choice, and all of this. And I walked away not only understanding libertarianism better, but also being a believer. So it was really that mandate that the organization has, is to expose these ideas to people who might not otherwise consider themselves classical liberals, but really giving them the opportunity to learn, and from there they can decide for themselves. So we're going to show a little quick clip here from Matt, going into a little bit more detail about what ILS is, as well as our flagship product, Freedom.
Yeah, I muted it.
Here, it's on the touch screen.
Oh, no, I muted it. This is planned.
Gotta roll out the punches.
No problem. Using a VGA.
Yeah, it looks like it's coming into your flash.
Try it.
Well, we need a,
Is the right sound device?
We need a cord.
chosen? It should be going through the VGA. Try it again. Don't press the
Not okay.
you guys know what the ILS is now, so go on their website if you choose to.
But what I'm specifically here to promote is our Freedom Week. So it's an opportunity for students of all different backgrounds, disciplines, and really ideologies to come together for about a week's time to be exposed to really the foundations of classical liberal thought, both from a philosophy background as well as economics basis. So it's free of charge. We put you up in a really nice place for a week and really go into a lot more detail than we would during a regular university course. So we're going to have the date and location to be announced in January, and we're taking applications for that until early February. So I encourage you to come by our booth out front and leave your name on our mailing list. Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm here with Mises Canada, but it's more than just that. I'm also here with Press for Truth, Cannabis Rights Coalition, the I guess the Rothbard Network, all kinds of different layers. I am selling books out there as well, but it's kind of spontaneous. I had nothing planned. You realize I was going up. But what we're doing here is a reformation. It's not a revolution. It's not, we're not storming some central government with guns. We're a bunch of individuals with different organizations, different ideas. We're all coming together, and we're kind of spreading a reformation in the same way that the Protestants broke away from the Catholic Church. And if that's a good analogy or not, but that's what I see what we're doing. So I've got books to help you along your way. I'm certainly working along my way. And Liberty.
All right, thanks again so much to our partner organizations for being here today. And now we're going to get on to our main talks, and we get David's face on the screen. Okay. So our first speaker is Karen Straughan. And I will admit, I didn't even know that the men's rights movement existed until a few years ago, and even when I did know about it, I didn't really know what it was about. And when people asked me, recommended to have Karen here, it kind of confused me. Why is a woman talking about men's issues? But after watching a few of her videos online, I was pleasantly surprised, and I hope her perspective opens up your minds. And yeah, enjoy. Now I'd like to invite Jesse up to the stage. He's the Vice President of SFL Advocacy for Young Boys. And yeah, he's going to introduce you to Karen.
Our first speaker is a blogger who's become the voice of anti-feminism online. Through her own efforts and those of the Honey Badger, she's inspired dozens to produce their own content, educated thousands, and offended millions. She's been interviewed by many prominent journalists, including CBC, CTV, and the BBC, and her crowning achievement is having Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks tell her to make him a sandwich. She's spoken at the New Hampshire and New York Libertarian conferences, so this isn't her first rodeo, given that she comes from Alberta, nobody should be surprised. Please welcome the woman, the legend, the rape apologist, Karen Straughan.
You can all hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to thank Students for Liberty for inviting me, and I also want to thank the weather for giving me a unique experience, which is, it's not every day someone with this hair actually gets frizz. So, with that out of the way, I'm going to preface my speech with a trigger warning. I am an anti-feminist. I know the short hair, the comfortable shoes, that really gave it away. But I am one of the bad people. And like any other supervillain, I spend most of my time spreading my horrible, evil message, anywhere I can. Internet, magazines, newspapers, on TV and radio programs occasionally, pretty much everywhere I can manage it. But don't despair, because I'm also going to preface this speech by clarifying that there are many feminisms, and the feminism that I talk about is not the feminism you're going to find in the dictionary. It's not just the movement for social, political, and equality for women. The feminism I'm going to talk about today is the feminism that is usually found in women's studies, gender studies, and interdisciplinary studies classes. It's the feminism found on the women's page of The Guardian, blogs like Jezebel. It's the feminism found in organizations like the National Organization for Women. It is not just a movement, it's an ideology based largely on Marxist class conflict theory, and it's propped up by subjectivist, postmodernist philosophies. So it's not really a goal, it's a worldview, it's a perceptual lens and a set of philosophical tools. And it's based on a set of axioms that don't and indeed cannot change, that women as a class are oppressed to the benefit and privileging of men. It's the feminism of Valerie Solanas, of Andrea Dworkin, of Catherine McKinnon and Simone de Beauvoir, of Gloria Steinem, Robin Morgan, Jessica Valenti, Naomi Wolf, Lori Penny, Clementine Ford, and Amanda Marshall. There do exist a handful of feminists I greatly admire, and I'm going to salute them here. Kathy Young, Wendy Kelroy, Christina Hoff Summers, Catherine Kitchens. There are feminists of the past I very much admire, Karen DeCrow, having just passed away last year, and even going all the way back to the suffragettes, like equalitarian suffragette Sylvia Pankhurst. All of these women shared something in common. They shared a viewpoint that men are not the enemies of women and never have been, and that equality is necessarily a two-way street. So there are many feminisms, and the feminism I'm going to talk about today is highly dogmatic, it's a politicized branch of the movement, it's one that thrives in the halls of power and breeds in campuses and universities across the Western world. Anybody old enough to remember, you guys probably are old enough to remember, Marlo Thomas's 1972 project, Free to Be You and Me. You might be tempted to declare that feminism is indeed a friend of freedom. This project was affiliated with the Ms. Foundation for Women, and it encouraged both boys and girls to not let society's expectations of gender hold them down, dictate who and what they could be and become. But within the history of the wider feminist movement, all the way back to the 1850s, there's always existed a streak of illiberalism a mile wide. From the support of alcohol prohibition by suffragists like Susan B. Anthony, to Emmeline and Christabel Pankhurst's vigorous campaigns in favor of a military draft in Britain, all the way into the modern era with the examples I'm going to share with you today, individual liberty and authoritarianism have been strange feminist bedfellows. Simone de Beauvoir even once asserted that women should not be authorized to stay home and build families, because if they were given the choice, too many women would take it. Where, I would ask, is there room for individual liberty in that? Today, despite a lip service dedication to individualism and freedom, we can observe this continuing conflict between libertarian and authoritarian ideals in many, many areas of feminist thought and activism. In the National Organization for Women's support of the US's proposed Paycheck Fairness Act, as early as 1982, Thomas Sowell had determined that there was no pay gap between men and women. The gap that existed was an earnings gap between women who had been or were married and everybody else. Subsequent studies done through the US Department of Labor and even the American Association of University Women have borne out this research. When you compare apples to apples and oranges to oranges, men and women in the US and in Canada and in Britain and pretty much everywhere else in the West are paid roughly the same. The raw wage gap that is usually trotted out by feminists and politicians, that women are paid 77 cents or 78 cents on a man's dollar, is a misleading statistic. It doesn't account for hours worked per day, per week, or per year. It doesn't account for level of education, choice of field, willingness to work in unpleasant or dangerous conditions, willingness to put in overtime, which is typically remunerated at a higher rate than regular hours, the lengthy interruptions in career women tend to take when they have children, willingness to travel for work or to relocate for a job. These are all factors that are largely responsible for skewing the wage gap in men's favor. Even in studies that determine the real adjusted wage gap is between 2 and 7%, which incidentally applies to most Western nations as well, there are factors that cannot be quantified accurately enough and are therefore left out of calculations. Anyone here would probably agree that if you're willing to work lots of overtime, you're probably more likely to get promoted and get paid pay raises. But we can't quantify exactly what effect that has on somebody's earnings, so that's always left out of these studies. And another one that's always usually left out is men's greater willingness to negotiate their salary. We don't know exactly how much that affects men's pay overall, so we leave it out. The raw wage gap in the US for individuals under 30 right now, however, without children, has been skewing in women's favor for a decade or more. In some cities in the US right now today, women, single women under 30 out-earn their male counterparts by up to 27%, which may be a function of steadily decreasing educational attainment for men, which Cafe could tell you all about. This is a trend that now exists in every single Western nation. Women comprise the majority of those enrolled in post-secondary school, the majority of graduates at every single level. And this generation of men in Canada and the US will be the first in hundreds of years to, on average, have less education than their fathers. It's been illegal to pay men and women differently for the same work in both Canada and the US since 1963. Yet the wage gap persists, and it persists largely because making beds and cleaning bathrooms in a hotel quick bus ride from home 5 days a week, it's just going to cost less than doing that same job in a work camp in northern Alberta 21 days in a row, 7 off. It persists because being a school teacher might require more education and specialization than working on an oil rig. But it doesn't involve being outdoors in minus 40-degree temperatures, risking your health and your limbs thousands of miles away from your family for weeks at a time. The same factors that influence average yearly pay for men and women, resulting in a gap of 20-something cents, also influence the fact that for every 7 women who die on the job, 93 men will. But that's not a gap that we talk about a whole lot in society. The Paycheck Fairness Act would bring in draconian measures requiring employers to disclose not only what they're paying their employees, but would require them, often through expensive litigation, to justify why they, for instance, pay their shipper receivers and warehouse employees, who are mostly men, more than their cashiers, who are mostly women. It would require courier companies to justify why they pay the mostly women who answer their phones less than they pay the men who go out in all weather in heavy traffic and lug heavy parcels to your door. I was in New Hampshire last year speaking at the Free State Project's Liberty Forum, and I had the privilege of sitting on a panel with feminist Naomi Wolf, a wonderful young woman named Amanda Billyrock, stood up in the audience during the question and answer period and said she didn't want equal pay legislation. What she wanted was the right to negotiate her own contracts. Simply stated, she wanted the right to demand more money from the next guy if she felt she was worth it, and she also wanted the right to undersell him, to offer her skills and her services for less if it could edge the other guy out for a job. The raw gender wage gap is almost entirely the result of free choices of individuals to arrange their lives as they see fit. Yet, this is a huge problem we need feminism to solve. And they are fully in support of coercive legislation to eliminate it, all the while misinterpreting what the statistic actually means and represents. And how many times have you heard those two sentences put together? It's a travesty that in 2015, women still are paid 78 cents for every dollar a man is paid. Women deserve equal pay for equal work. Both of those sentences are factually correct, but they have nothing to do with each other. More than this, if you understand why the wage gap exists, can anyone argue that it represents an injustice against women to have the freedom to take a year off when you have a child? Is that an injustice against women? That women have that option, that women overwhelmingly make the choice to work in an office rather than in a cherry picker fixing power lines? It's people's freedom to make their own choices. That's what is being held up to us as an injustice that requires legislation to fix. Is Simone de Beauvoir correct in saying women should not be authorized to make their own choices? Because if they are, they will make choices she doesn't like. Another area where feminism has exposed itself as an enemy of freedom is in its support of speech codes on campuses across the Western world. In the US, there is a growing movement to put trigger warnings on books like Huckleberry Finn, The Great Gatsby, which would allow students to opt out of studying them. And in Canada, there have been suggestions to essentially no platform male students, to not allow them to speak in the classroom until the women have had their turn. Because apparently, allowing a man to speak at all silences women's voices. In the UK, the song Blurred Lines was banned from some campuses on the grounds that it is a rape anthem, despite the fact that any sane person reading the lyrics to that song will realize it's an enthusiastic consent anthem. Also in the UK, the women's branch of the National Student Union required conference goers recently to refrain from applauding, as the noise can trigger anxiety and panic attacks in people who have trauma in their lives. They suggested that feminist jazz hands instead would be a good way to show your approval of a speaker. I kid you not. Or sizzle fingers. Can you imagine a whole room that would just be eerie? Everybody's just going like this, like where am I just want to go now. Prominent speakers such as Ann Coulter and Condoleezza Rice have been disinvited from speaking at some campuses in the US because feminists don't like them. And noted feminist atheist Ayaan Hirsi Ali, her honorary degree from Brandeis University was cancelled just a year or two ago due to feminist student union complaints that she's not politically correct enough. In Toronto, Warren Farrell and Janice Fiamengo have been subjected to feminist protests aimed not at protesting their speech or presenting counter-speech, but at shutting their events down. And they were interviewed on camera, literally saying, "We're here to shut this event down." Troublingly, the criminal protest at the Warren Farrell talk, where protesters barricaded the doors and assaulted attendees and police, was supported by the University of Toronto's Women's Studies faculty and sponsored by the Canadian Union of Public Employees. Professor Fiamengo's talk at her own university in Ottawa, no less, had feminist students banging desks, blowing noisemakers, singing, shouting, and chanting, and refusing to comply with requests by security that they quiet down or leave. And her speaking engagement in that case was she just gave up. She just said, forget it, let's just kind of call it off. Dr. Farrell's crime was that he wanted to talk about increasing rates of male suicide, decreasing rates of educational attainment for boys and young men, problems like pornography, video game, and internet addiction, and a growing failure to launch phenomenon that some of your parents might be acquainted with. That affects boys quite badly. Professor Fiamengo's crime was that she, as a former radical feminist, and having seen it from the inside, is now extremely critical of radical feminism and dubious about some of its theoretical doctrines and practices. Just last December, a law professor wrote an article in the New Yorker lamenting that she had students demand she not teach rape law anymore, as the subject is triggering for some students. This is particularly disturbing, given the fact that rape law has to be taught as a separate subject of the criminal law, because 40 years of reforms have rendered a rape trial completely different, a completely different beast than any other serious felony. The rules of evidence are different, court procedures are different, and certain forms of witness examination and cross-examination are prohibited altogether. In this professor's words, imagine a medical student who is training to be a surgeon but who fears that he'll become distressed if he sees or handles blood, and then demanding that the curriculum be changed to accommodate it. According to her, several of her colleagues are considering dropping rape law from their curricula due to pressure from campus feminists and other groups, other progressive groups. Outside of classes and speakers and in the daily interactions of students, feminists on campuses in the US have pushed for a broad and extremely malleable definition of harassment. Despite such definitions failing several court challenges in the US all the way to SCOTUS, dozens of universities under pressure from feminist and progressive groups have discarded the reasonable person standard and base their harassment policies entirely on the subjective feelings of the alleged victim. Even more disturbingly, what this would mean is that if you were to ask a mentally ill young woman who hasn't been taking her meds if she'd like to have coffee, and she interprets that to mean he's going to rape me, her interpretation stands. That is the interpretation that the adjudication tribunal will take. Such a situation is the inevitable result of defining harassment solely based on the subjective feelings of the complainant. Even more, feminists in the US have thrown their support behind legislation dictating how university students have to conduct their sex lives. These policies, referred to as yes means yes laws or affirmative consent, they sound not scary at all. But they've been legislated in California and New York despite having failed several court challenges that found they essentially reverse the burden of proof. While these laws apply only to university students now and only to university hearings, there is a significant push by feminist activists and feminist organizations to try to incorporate them into the criminal justice system. So we may end up with, just in sexual assault law, we may end up with a cornerstone of our Western democracy just being put aside because due process and the burden of proof make it so that some men get away with it. One of the very interesting things about affirmative consent, when you transpose it against the definition of harassment in universities in the US, is that it puts young men in a double bind. Not asking for consent before every single thing that you do is going to be, including hugging or kissing. It necessarily means that that act is an assault. But the mere act of asking for consent can be construed as harassment, all depending on whether the person you're asking is reasonable.
And reproduction.
Do you see why they call me a rape apologist? Also interesting is the push by feminists to promote an inquisitorial system on college campuses regarding sexual misconduct rather than the adversarial system that exists when adjudicating serious crimes in every single modern democracy. In the inquisitorial system, a single body acts not only as judge, jury, and executioner, but also investigator, prosecutor, and defense counsel. Democratic Senator Kirsten Gillibrand in the US has publicly stated that now is not the time to concern ourselves with due process rights or the presumption of innocence, because such trivialities conflict with the interests of complainants. Now, in 1966, our new Prime Minister's father, Pierre Trudeau, asserted that there is no place for the state in the nation's bedrooms. He made his comment during the controversy over the decriminalization of homosexuality. Yet feminists seem to want to invite the state right back into our bedrooms, where I'm sure they will tell Liz that she should make her damn bed. And in what ways and for what reasons it is appropriate for citizens to have sex with each other. And of course, any resistance to these proposed measures, it will be met with accusations of misogyny, rape apology, and worse. When I was in New Hampshire on that panel with Naomi Wolf, I had the temerity actually to assert that rape is a hard crime to prove in court because it's based solely on state of mind consent. That the only physical evidence of sexual assault is also evidence of a perfectly legal act that millions of people across the globe are engaging in right now, consensually. And she called me a rape apologist in front of an audience of about 150 people. She was so upset moments later when I suggested that working class women in the 1800s probably did not feel oppressed by their own husbands, that she dropped an F-bomb and shouted, of course they did. It was kind of a big disaster. And I cooled it after that because I was worried she wouldn't stick around for her keynote address, because she was really upset. This year, George Will had the gall to write an article in the Washington Post, wherein he suggested that our approach to rape is sexist. He argued that if two adults equally willingly drink, equally willingly get drunk, equally willingly decide to have sex with each other, when we presume that the man is a rapist and the woman is his victim, that can only be because of sexism. And as a result of a feminist smear campaign calling him a misogynistic rape apologist, he lost some of his contracts for his syndicated column. The St. Louis Dispatch was one of them. Bill Frezza, writing for Forbes from his perspective as the director on the national board of his former fraternity, recommended to current frat members that they turn young women away from their parties and events if those women had been pre-gaming. drinking before an event for any adults, grown-ups, people who aren't in school right now. His article was deleted within 3 hours due to a barrage of complaints originating at Jezebel, feminist website Jezebel, and he was fired. What was his crime? He suggested that the concern runs both ways, that we shouldn't just be concerned about drunk girls going to a frat house because they might get raped. We should also be concerned about the young men in that frat house and their liability, and that in order for them to stay safe, we should turn these girls away. And, well, caring about men, that gets you fired. Justin Bakula, a prominent member of the atheist and skeptic community, was forced a couple of years ago to resign his position as head of his chapter of the Secular Coalition of America because he had the temerity to be skeptical about feminist claims of rampant sexual harassment and sexual assault at conferences and events. You heard me, a leader in the skeptic community was forced to step down because he was too skeptical. Now, he was ousted because these claims were completely unsubstantiated. They were vague, they were ephemeral. In fact, I was watching a live stream with one of these feminists making these claims, and she was asked, what do you tell women who say they've never experienced this? And she said, well, it's either internalized misogyny or they just haven't been trained how to see misogyny, how to recognize it. You know, if somebody actually hates me, I can usually tell. During his discussion of those claims, he mentioned a then feminist named Amy Roth, and he was quickly accused by other feminists of having doxed her. In response to these accusations, he linked to her Etsy page, where all of her information was available, uploaded by her publicly, and to demonstrate that he hadn't revealed any personal information about this woman, at which point the accusations transmogrified into accusations that the mere act of linking her Etsy page was in itself doxing. So there's not a whole lot of rational thinking going on in these things. Meanwhile, the methods by which his enemies coerced him into stepping down included slander, libel, employment blacklisting, and an organized letter-writing campaign to his parents, who they doxed, to tell them what a horrible misogynistic son they'd raised. Deluged by negative press and accusations of malfeasance, fueled by a giant game of internet telephone and hate mobs harassing his parents, he finally stepped down. He just threw up his hands and said it's not worth it. Only just recently, Tim Hunt, Nobel laureate and respected scientist, was forced to resign from several of his honorary positions after a feminist science journalist named Connie St. Louis made false and defamatory statements about him over Twitter. Statements that led to a mob of like-minded feminists demanding his head on a pike. Hunt was a speaker at a science journalism event in Korea and was asked to give a toast at the luncheon off the cuff. In his toast, he made a self-deprecating joke about what a dinosaur he is, and he's so glad that women in science are achieving things despite misogynistic monsters like him. His joke was greeted with laughter and applause. Connie St. Louis tweeted that it was greeted with stony silence and disapproval. He hadn't even gotten off the plane before his wife had been contacted by the London College, I believe, to let her know that if he wasn't going to step down from his honorary position there, they'd fire him. Now, numerous influential people, including several very high-achieving women, stepped in and defended him, and he was still vilified as a misogynist, and his reputation was just all but destroyed. When it became evident that Connie St. Louis had blatantly and repeatedly lied on her CV online for the university, she was not penalized at all. When the recording of the event emerged, showing that her version of events was a big old fabrication, she was not penalized at all. the mainstream press has really done little to correct the record. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. Have you ever heard a feminist say, don't tell women how to dress? Women should be able to wear what they like without being blamed or shamed. Perhaps we could apply this to the feminist response to Matt Taylor's clothing choices the day he, with the help of a team of massively talented men and women, successfully landed a space probe on a comet millions of miles from Earth. On that day, he wore what he had come to describe as his lucky shirt. Not so lucky now. The shirt had been handmade for him by a female friend, the wife of one of his favorite tattoo artists. And if you've ever seen pictures of him, he's got full sleeves. He even had the probe landing on the comet tattooed on his thigh as a, to commemorate it. He's just covered with tattoos. He's a really cool looking guy. And he just absolutely got blasted. The next day, after feminists had accused him for days of essentially saying, they're essentially saying, you're the reason women won't go into STEM because you're sexist and you're misogynist and you scare them. He was on TV sobbing an apology. Because his shirt looked like it could have been a photo of a slow. And I guess that's not okay. So essentially, how long do I have?
30 seconds.
30 seconds. Essentially what we have here is we have a pattern of behavior. We have a pattern of behavior on the part of feminists that when people say things they don't like, when people do things they don't like, when people engage in activities that they don't like, when people have sex the wrong way, that's not okay. Somebody's gonna get put in jail, somebody's gonna get kicked out of school, somebody's gonna lose their job. That is a huge, massive problem in a society that values freedom of expression, and they have every right to express their opinion, absolutely. And Tim Hunt has every right to tell a joke about himself without getting fired. Thank you.
If you have any questions, please feel free to come up here. And then there you go.
Don't change it. No, it's your name. Oh, don't change it. Then people know. Don't, it'll give you dogs.
So far behind us.
Okay,
There we go.
okay, go ahead, questions?
Hello. Hi. So I'm not very familiar with your work, but I would like to ask you, refer back to the beginning of your speech where you were talking about how, like you were contrasting, I guess, like modern feminism with the more classical. And you were saying how it comes out of some sort of Marxist analysis of society. I'm not sure what you were meaning, but could you just elaborate or expand on that a little bit? Just
Okay.
maybe it'll shed more light on the second half of your
Well,
speech.
Interestingly enough, the Declaration of Sentiments from Seneca Falls and the Communist Manifesto were published the exact same year. And a lot of the rhetoric in the two books is really very, very similar. And the main difference is that instead of the bourgeoisie and the proletariat as the classes who are in conflict, it's men are the oppressors, and women are the oppressed as classes. And a lot of their theoretical framework borrows heavily on their sort of offshoot issues and offshoot theories, also borrows heavily from Marxist theory. And incidentally, it was quite interesting because some of the most vehement anti-feminists during the suffrage era were socialist Marxists who saw that, yeah, no, this is not how men and women are, this is not how men and women interact. And men are not the oppressors of women. So, and then they thought it was distracting from the class struggle between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat that they really wanted to fight. So, does that explain things? Okay.
Hi, Karen. Michael James Penn. Thank you very much for coming down here to present. It was a fantastic speech. My question is, Aaron Russo made a documentary for Freedom and Fascism, and he talks about his friend, or his former friend, David Rockefeller, how they basically financed and supported, I believe it was the second wave feminism movement, so they essentially doubled the tax base in the United States, and of course borrow more money to and be able to pay that interest off with that expanded tax base. So my question then would be, today, with the third wave feminist movement, do you think that maybe the UN and other, for establishment interests may be using that to potentially censor the internet?
There actually was a panel, the Broadband Commission of the UN, just a couple of weeks ago, and we had a couple of feminist speakers that I'm familiar with, Anita Sarkeesian and Zoe Quinn, testifying on the panel. And this panel discussion was about cyber violence against women and girls, because we all know men don't have to deal with, abusive comments and being called bad names and stuff on the internet. One of the things that was really frightening, because this entire commission is supposed to be determining how we move forward with what's allowed on the internet, and how they're discussing things like removing immunity from carriers, like from YouTube, removing their immunity. Right now, YouTube and Blogger and all of these other platforms, Twitter and all of this, are not held legally responsible for what users upload, right? And they're actually talking about holding those corporations accountable for what people say on their services. So essentially, I could upload a comment, I don't know, that says that my next door neighbor practices bestiality, and that's obvious libel. And YouTube or Blogger could be held legally liable for my comments. So what this necessarily would mean is the end of comment sections, period, because nobody has the manpower to put a human set of eyes on every single comment and then fact check it to make sure that it's not actionable. And every single person on YouTube would, every time you uploaded a video, there would have to be a human set of eyes on it to make sure that there's nothing actionable in there. This is not okay. This is not gonna turn out well. And one of the reasons why, one of the things that Anita Sarkeesian described as, her experience and, her horrible experience, and she has, I'm sure, had a lot of really nasty comments and emails and all kinds of horrible stuff. But she said it's not just the actual threats that you can take criminal action. It's not just about what's legal and illegal. It's the constant daily barrage of you suck, you're a liar. That's protected speech, right? And somehow that's getting into a panel discussion in front of the UN about what speech should be allowed on the internet or not. That people tell her she sucks. Well, yeah, what do you do? People tell me I suck all the time. And, you get over it, really. So, but yeah, no, it's a scary, scary thing. And as far as corporations and governments, they really, really do like feminism. Corporations like it because increasing competition for jobs drives wages down. Governments like it because they have all those extra taxes. They really like feminism because kids get raised in daycares with approved state-trained people who are going to teach them the right things. In Ontario, I believe, they've been talking for years about mandatory preschool starting at age 2. That's a massive, massive blow to personal liberty. It just is. And of course, feminists love it because it's essentially free daycare. So more women can go to work and work on that wage gap thing. So, All right,
Thank
next,
you very much.
thanks.
I'm gonna borrow from this question. You mentioned the interview with Aaron Russo. So you just confirmed this premise that governments like it because it increases their tax base. But I guess I'll just vaguely ask you, since you know so much about this. What other motivations are there behind feminism? Like if Rockefeller's funding it, are there reasons that certain foundations are backing feminist groups other than increasing the tax base? That last point you made is something I'm suspicious of. Kind of eroding the family and then forcing people to put their kids in public schools. We just had an election here, NDP wanted to set up free daycare centers. And if you look at what happened with public schools, they eventually made them compulsory. So once you get that set up, that's probably what they want to do. And also the ruling class just seems to be of the opinion that the world is overpopulated. So maybe they don't want people forming families.
Yeah, they're not gonna be happy when the demographic winter hits, right? When the aging population is actually outnumbers the people who are working. They're really not gonna enjoy that. But one of the things right now that's happening is we actually are seeing an increasing, essentially a bourgeois and proletariat growing divide between those two. The people who get married and tend to stay married are educated, fairly wealthy. The people who are essentially suffering under the erosion of family are working class people. And these are women who don't have careers, they have jobs, right? And they actually are the ones who would most benefit from being in a stable, intact family where they can work less. And 63% of full-time working women have, when they do polls, they say they'd rather work less, not more. But they're increasingly having to work, and it's not the people at the top who have this problem, it's the people at your Tim Hortons making your sandwiches and serving you your donuts. They're the ones who are really struggling right now. And so you have broadening income inequality, and you have essentially two different classes in society now who are starting to live completely differently from each other, which is kind of a frightening thing. So.
Hi Karen, my name is Tyson. I've been a fan of your videos and blog for the last year, so it's, yeah, there's a lot of people who have called you the gateway to anti-feminism, and that was definitely the case for me. I've always considered myself, and I still consider myself, a liberal. And my views on, I would even have considered myself a feminist 3 years ago, not knowing much about it, because I believe in equality of the sexes. I believe everybody should have the same opportunity, what you would consider progressive views, right? So when I'm having conversations with people, I'm mostly liberal friends, I'm always having to sort of have this moral apology and preface that, no, I don't believe these things because, what the things that you talk about and what a lot of people, John the other, talk about.
Yeah.
Because I'm some sort of conservative who thinks that women should be pregnant and barefoot in the kitchen. I think that's the opposite. My problem with, some of the rhetoric coming from third wave intersectional feminism is the sort of ridiculous double standards, the infantilization of women and men, all these things that I think really stand in the way of true equality. So I think that, that's not very egalitarian, it's not very progressive. So with that in mind, I see a lot of arguments lately and end up being on the same side of the argument as people like, Mila Yiannopoulos and Gavin McInnes. In my head, I'm not actually on Sky News and post with them. But, I agree with a lot of the things that they say, but the fact is that they're coming from a traditional conservative point of view. And while I respect their ability to elucidate their opinions, I feel that it's kind of like, yeah, I totally agree with you on that, but I know that we're coming at this from different points of view, right? Like Gavin McInnes is like, you and I are saying the same thing, but you believe you're saying that because you think that women shouldn't be working, and that this appeal to naturalism or divinity or what religious reasons they have. Do you think that there's any, for lack of a better word, some sort of danger in that, that duplicity and that, the temporary rhetorical alliance between progressive people who consider themselves anti-feminist and conservative people who are just like that?
Oh, well, I mean, the these kinds of battles make strange bedfellows for sure. But there are very, very deep schisms within anti-feminism and sort of the men's rights community. It's very, very difficult for more conservative people and the more progressive people to actually work together without constantly bickering, right? I mean, like, it's just constant, and it's constant sniping at each other, and we're not gonna get anything done. But at the same time, it's healthy to have that, because the last thing we want is an echo chamber. The last thing we want is what happens at Feminism or Jezebel or on Reddit, all of the feminist subreddits, where the moment that you express an opinion or ask the wrong question, and they think that that was a loaded question, even though you were just actually curious and you didn't know, you're banned, you're gone. Your comments get deleted and you're out of there. That is not a good way to try and figure out what policies we should have, what legislations we should pass. You know, the echo chamber is a bad, bad place. So, I mean, I don't think we're gonna have a dangerous melding of these sort of left-wing and right-wing people in anti-feminism. We're allies for now. We're allies on a case-by-case basis, for sure. But yeah, I can see them getting particularly friendly with each other. And I was just asked by Stephen Crowder a while ago if I wanted to go in with him and Gavin McGuinness, and I don't know if this is going to happen, sort of podcasting platform where we would just sort of share promotional costs and you know, share a big platform. And I told him, like, okay, I'd really love to do that, but we need some more liberal voices in there too. And I've got a couple suggestions, because I'm not really that interested in being part of something that's otherwise entirely conservative. But I do really appreciate Gavin McGuinness and Stephen Crowder. So.
Real quick before we start, we're actually at the 45-minute mark, so we're going to have to call questions at this point.
Oh, well, I can answer your question. I can do that, just find me. All right, that's it for me.
I think she was pretty cool. Well, that also. Oh. And when I go to anything over past.
You're sure. You'll scare everybody.
I think that's what my least of but, you know, each ever found seven, I think he's but it actually like, I just, guys, they're not, they sort of ways out. And then, it's usually, you're doing case on such a long. They have that letter. And it's the same thing. It's not even, it's a case under our prosecution. One of the cases that they were so you feel kind of. But that would be, I'd really like to talk with you about that. I don't know if
Well, but if you
You're okay.
well, I'm saying, well, I have videos of yeah, no, I always tell her, I always tell her, they have to and whether or not there's discussion in Ireland, like, yeah. You can read the letters online, it's like the most simple, like, it's like, it's not offensive thing. You know?
They have to sign it all.
Yeah, it's like, how would this possibly be this way? Because I'm on the website and I'm saying, this is the most offensive.
Are you?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I'll ask you that Oh.
sells certain multiple rights, or that the original owner of something doesn't sell certain
Do you know if these two seats were open or? Fair enough. Yes.
Yeah, I know.
So that was how I. Yeah, that's kind and I didn't really understand that. Jacob. Oh, dude, nice beard.
No, thanks, man.
How you doing, man? I'm doing good.
I'm doing good.
Yeah. Right, it's been since last year, right?
I think.
No, we were at the convention.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
I got my glasses. My friend's here too.
Wait, TK.
Yes.
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 Wait, which of you is Jake and which is Jake?
He's shaking. Who's Jake? Who's Jake? That's okay. That's.
Oh my god. That's so funny.
It was like a profile.
I'm doing good. I'm super happy to be here. I got very close. I'm in the system.
I didn't like
Yeah, apparently I was registered, like, I don't know if I did it or if
Or something, I don't know.
No, I'm not hearing 20 minutes. Since I woke up, it's not. That's good. Alright, so
They basically are legal organization that fights against law all the time.
Yes, yes.
I can do that.
Yeah, this pretty much looks like everyone. All right, so we're gonna go to our next talk, and our next speaker is Nicola. We're gonna, depending on when you registered, you might have noticed that there was a change in speakers, and this was my worst nightmare come true. A week before my event, a speaker drops out. But thankfully, someone that I trust dearly recommended Nick. And at first I was kind of skeptical just because I haven't spoken to him in real life, but he seemed pretty nice during when we were emailing and stuff. But what really won me over was when he gave me the title of his talk. And I'm really excited to hear what he has to say. So I'd like to invite Rico, the president of UBC Students for Liberty, to introduce himself.
Hi everyone. So Nick Loenen is a former Richmond City Councillor and former member of the British Columbia Legislature. He obtained his master's degree in political science from UBC in 1995. His book, Citizenship and Democracy, A Case for Proportional Representation, was published in 1997. The same year, Nick chaired the Reform Party of Canada's task force on electoral reform. He founded Fair Voting BC in 1998 and played a prominent role in electoral reform efforts, including BC Citizen Assembly and the 2005 and 2009 referenda on electoral reform. He formerly served on the National Board of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation and was Sessional Lecturer, Department of Political Science, UBC. Now in retirement, Nick loves sailing and woodworking. In 2012, his wooden boat building, How to Build a Dragon Class Sailboat, was published. So, Nick Loenen.
Well, thank you kindly for the invitation. And even though I wasn't your first choice, I'll try to do my very best. It's a topic that's dear to my heart, and I think it will be to yours as well. You know, politics is about power. Government is about power. And the question is, in fact, it's the only power that is coercive. It's backed by jails and guns. And the question is, how do you control that power? It's an age-old question. But I tell you, the voting system is absolutely key. Not many people realize that. Think of what voting systems do. They are the rules by which votes are translated into seats. They allocate power. The voting system has a set of rules that determines who and what will be represented in Ottawa. It determines who is ultimately accountable to whom. Now, our voting system is known as first past the post, and we have had that since our inception in 1867. But almost immediately, starting in 1893, there have been attempts to change it, to make it more democratic, more accountable. And throughout our history, there have been endless attempts and promises. Former Prime Minister Straughan, former Prime Minister Stephen Harper, while they were in opposition, they were all in favor of changing this. They quickly forgot their promises once they were in power. Now we have Trudeau, same thing, a promise. And the question is, will Trudeau be able to deliver? Will he take a step that no one before him has been able to take? Or will his own caucus walk, as happened to René Lévesque in 1976 in Quebec? He had promised very persistently and extensively on the promise to bring in proportional representation. And once they got into power, his own cabinet and his caucus said, "You gotta be an idiot. We have just had a huge bonus in seats because of those wonderful rules. Do you want to change that?" Right? So in his memoirs, Lévesque says, the greatest disappointment of his political career is the fact that he had to renege on that promise. That's huge when you think about it. Or will Trudeau experience what Gordon Campbell experienced right here in BC in the 2005 referendum? His caucus very cleverly upped the ante, raised the bar, said, okay, we're going to allow the unwashed mob to have a say in this. We'll raise the stakes up to 60%. Now, as it turned out, 58% of the people of this province in that referendum supported changing from first past the post to proportional representation. 58%. Trudeau just recently won a major majority government victory on what? Less than 40%, right? We think that's wonderful. We had 58% of the people say, this is what we want, and yet it was denied. Didn't make it. It's probably, within Canadian history, the largest majority of support in a referendum. And yet it was denied. Why? Because the caucus of Campbell rebelled. They said no. We'll cleverly rig the rules. You see how difficult it is to change the rules by which we allocate power. You know, for Trudeau to ask his caucus to embrace proportional representation is akin to asking turkeys to vote for an early Thanksgiving. There's a conflict there. See, the only people that can change our system are the ones that benefit from not changing. And so, the promise of real change, if you look back at our history, it's very, very, very difficult to attain. Now look at our voting system. First past the post. Its central feature is that it has local ridings, constituencies, geographic areas. The House of Commons, 338 seats, and every one of these seats is allocated to a particular group of Canadians who live within a particular area. And every one of you is assured that you will have your fair share because you will have one seat in Ottawa. Someone in that seat who is going to speak for you, who knows your needs, and who will represent you. And so we have all of these constituencies, these local ridings, Kamloops, South Delta, Kingsway, Vancouver, Kingsway, and so on. That we are told that local representation is one of the great virtues of first past the post. And every attempt to do something about our system, we get warned. Don't embrace proportional representation because, you know, the local representation you now enjoy, it'll be taken from you. It'll be wiped out. You will lose your voice. Really? What voice? Formally, first past the post is designed to provide very strong local representation. In practice, it's not true at all. People don't experience it that way. Study after study shows that Canadians do not feel they can participate in that that anyone is speaking for them. There is, in fact, a huge disconnect between what happens in Ottawa and what the people on the ground experience. We're not participants. Now, why is that? Why is it that a system that was designed to give full, local, effective representation to Canadians, to voters, it doesn't deliver? It delivers the opposite of what is promised. How come voters, while formally designated a seat, do not feel any sense of participation? You know, local representation is a myth. That your MP speaks for you is a myth. It just isn't so. MPs do not answer to their voters under our system. They, you know, supposedly represent a certain geographic area, but it's not true. If that were true, the House of Commons seating arrangement would be quite different. You would think that the various MPs would crowd around each other in terms of region and neighborhood. If we're going to represent regions, why don't we, and neighbors, why don't we be neighborly? Is that how the House of Commons is arranged? Is that how your MPs are seated in the House of Commons? Not at all. They are seated by party, because party is more important than your local constituency. What counts in the House of Commons is party, and that is why they're seated that way. Your MP becomes party property the day after the election. In fact, it starts before that. It starts at the nomination. And Jody Emery can talk about that, as he probably would. You see, from beginning to end, you cannot enter the political arena without party approval. You are party property from day one. And that is what robs us of our voters. You know, MPs are beholden to their party far more than to their voters. And Canadians actually know that. Because when they vote, they don't vote for the local candidate. The local candidate is just a means to vote for a particular party and increasingly a particular leader. You know, I was a candidate twice provincially, once federally, and I remember in those days it was Bill Van was the leader of the party. We would get calls, and I would sometimes answer these myself. I want to vote for Bill Van Zandt. Who's the local guy? I had been on local council for 4 years, elected twice, but it wasn't me they were voting for. I won because of Bill Van Zandt. And 5 years later, I lost because of Bill Van Zandt. That's the reality. And people, study after study will show that people actually vote. Yeah, you have to do it for the local candidate, but that is a means of voting for a particular party. So why do we keep up this myth? If in fact we intend to express a preference for a party, why do we have this awkward, backhanded way of doing it? Why not be honest? Why do we persist in upholding a myth? Okay, I've said that MPs, in fact, don't speak for their constituents. They speak for their parties. But pity the poor MP who actually tries to speak for her constituents. How would she know what to say? What position to take? And why is that? It's because, you see, the first past the post, its view of representation suggests that what ought to be represented is geography, or you might say postal code, and that what really combines Canadians and what is most important to Canadians when it comes to politics is the kind of postal code they have. The fact is that for most people, your political interests are very diverse. Canada is not homogeneous. We all have ideals and aspirations that are very different. And you may share your political interests with people who are 2,000 kilometers away or 200 kilometers away, but not necessarily the ones that are 2 doors away. To think, to assume that anyone and everyone who shares a postal code will also share their political ideals. It doesn't fit our day and age. Perhaps at one time, geography mattered. That's no longer the case. Particularly in the age of social media. Why are we prevented by our voters to join hands with, to pool our voice with those who are truly together on political issues, who share a community of political thought, ideology, goals, ambitions? Our voting system prevents us from doing that. You know, constituency has a double meaning. It can mean a particular geographic area, but it can also mean those who share a common view. Our system is designed to represent a geography, but it's not designed to represent people who have a common view. We're not allowed to express, or at least we're severely penalized if we express our identity in terms of a political philosophy, political ideal, political goal. Why do we put out that, right? In short, I have to hurry up. In short, first past the post fails in its most central virtue, which is giving voice to localities. It fails in that. But look, that is not its only failure. Because it also is often touted as providing stable government, right? The fact that the Liberals have a 50-part or a 50-seat bonus is deemed to be okay. Why? Because we like stable government. Now we have a majority. It's an artificial majority. The majority of voters did not vote for this party, but we have a majority. Why? Because it's stable. So we're told, right? And we're also told that proportional representation leads to coalition, minority government, instability, people that are unable to get anything done. Now, is it true that first past the post leads to stable government? Well, it does if you look at it in terms of how long the governments last. But if you look at it in terms of public policies, the durability of public policies is not true at all. Because under our system, we bring in a whole new cabinet, a whole new crew, and even as we speak, Trudeau is very busy undoing a whole big chunk of the Harvard agenda. So what you have in public policy is these wild swings. That's not stable. That's yo-yo politics, or in terms of public policies, it's going back and forth. Whereas if you look at proportional systems, yes, governments will fall more frequently, but after each election, you have largely the same people around the cabinet table. 85% or more are the same faces. And what that does is it creates stability of public policy. So when it comes, when people claim that our system, our voting system, leads to stability, it's not true. It's not true. It's not true in terms of public policy. Only true in terms of how long the government's lasts. And in fact, the Canadian experience with minority governments has been very positive. You know, we had minorities from 63 to 72. They were some of the best governments we've ever had. National health care came up with it. The flat pensions for seniors. So, you see, even in the Canadian context, our experience with minority governments has not been negative. All right, I have to get to the Liberal platform. Okay. We had Trudeau say that election 2015 would be the last and the first basketball, right? And he talked a great deal about proportional representation and about consensus building and respect in Parliament for the opposition and so on. And he talked about making every vote count. What a wonderful prospect. And the media, they fasten onto that. And I tell you, my heart was jumping for joy until I read the fine print. Right? Here is the Liberal platform fine print. It promises an all-party committee of MPs to make a recommendation for electoral reform, including the preferential ballot and or a proportional representation, and that the recommendation will be turned into law within 18 months of the election. So I'll make a rash prediction. I'm going to give you a few comments here if I have time. My rash prediction is that first past the post is going to be replaced with a preferential ballot, also known as the alternative vote. In the US, it's called choice voting. So why do I think that that will be the result? Because the Liberals can keep their promise without inflicting any kind of self-sacrifice. Because the preferential ballot is absolutely no better than what we have. It's a slightly different way of doing it. Okay. But in essence, it still maintains the largest party will have a majority of seats. It's no more proportional than the system we have. Parties will still be in power. That is to say, the MPs will be spokespeople for their party more than for their voters. We will still have yo-yo politics. So nothing of substance will change in the preferential vote. None of it. And we know that because Australia's had it since 1901. You can look at election after election. So, is this real change? It's change. Real change? Not at all. So, the weakness of the Liberal promise lies in the fact that it allows the MPs to have final say, which is totally wrong. It's we the people that ought to have a say in those kind of things. You don't allow the politicians to make the rules under which they parcel out power. That's a recipe for disaster. Would the people pick preferential ballot? Would the people pick first class? Never. Never. And we know that with great certainty. Because in 2005, the referendum right here in BC was preceded by a very intensively democratic, deeply democratic process, where 170 ordinary voters were picked off the sidewalk, so to speak, and they, for a whole year, studied all the options. And they came away with a recommendation for proportional representation, which was supported by 58% of the population. It was a form of proportional representation very different from any other, because, you know, most proportional representation systems, they represent parties, ideological agenda. Others represent geography. The STV system is wonderful because it allows voters to choose what it is they want. Do you want a party to represent you, or do you want a local vote? STV has huge amount of choice for voters. It puts voters in the driver's seat. And that is what a democracy is all about. It also has a built-in US-like primary, and because of that, successful candidates know that their loyalty to their voters ought to be much stronger than the loyalty to the party. That is the system that citizens would select. You know, the Trudeau promise is akin, and reminding me of former Liberal Prime Minister Mackenzie King, who, on the conscription issues, famously said, "Conscription if necessary, but not necessarily conscription." And Trudeau says the same thing about proportional representation. What does it mean? I don't think it will mean anything. You figure out what it means. Thank you very much.
Yes, the question's here.
Hi, thanks a lot for your presentation. I think actually your two arguments about that, you know, defenders of first class opposed about, you know, geographic representation and stability were actually good critiques. But one of the things that you said when you were talking about stability, that in an election, you know, you might have changes in government, but at the end, you're likely to have a PR system, a lot of the same people around the sort of cabinet table. And that's something I think about PR systems that concerns me, probably should concern people who are skeptical about a lot of the things that government do. I think one of the great advantages, I know that there are many, but of democracies is that you can throw the bums out, you can get rid of the government. And that seems like one of the difficulties in a PR system is you need very large shifts in the electorate, which seem not to happen very frequently. In the sort of system we have now, it's much easier to get rid of the government. So I wonder if you would comment on that, and whether you see that as accurate and as a positive or negative thing.
Sure. Well, thank you for that. And, you know, the prime example is Italy. Since the Second World War, on average, they have a new government every 18 months, I think. And so social scientists used to be very concerned about it and said, great instability, you know, do we want to be like Italy? And then later on, I would say the last 15 years or so, the story has shifted completely. Now social scientists say, you know, the problem with Italy is they have too much stability, right? Because there's always 80–90% of the same people on the cabinet. And that leads to corruption, cronyism, and all of those problems. So yes, there are extremes to be avoided. I don't, you know, I've argued for strenuously from the time I wrote my book. I studied this in the early 1990s extensively. And I've always been impressed with the single transfer vote, which is a form of proportional representation. It is not extreme proportional representation. That is, it still over-rewards a little bit the larger parties. And so that, but secondly, what I said earlier, it puts the voters in the driver's seat. And that is the part that I really like as a Democrat. You know, we can all argue and have different points of view about what a political agenda should look like and what public policies are healthy and good and beneficial. But I think at bottom, most of us, regardless of our other differences, would agree that in a democracy you want full citizens' participation. And because in an election system you allocate and portion out power and you put in place accountability measures, it is centrally important to my way that our voters be in the driver's seat when it comes to making those kind of choices. It's a long answer.
Well, thank you very much. I'm from the US, and of course we have the same system, that's proposed plurality. And except that I think our congressional districts are something like 7 times larger than the Canadian, you call them ridings, something like that?
Yeah, we do.
So, so the sense of that you really don't have a voice, that as an ordinary citizen, you're hardly represented, really not represented at all, is even stronger. I also think, the US has 2 major parties, and that is a direct result of first past the post voting systems. I was, a long time ago, it's about 50 years ago now, I was involved with the Libertarian Party. I was actually, for a time, I was National Vice Chair. And during that time, I was all full of enthusiasm for the ideas that we could promote, that we could advance. But then I studied the history of third parties in America, and it became very obvious that a third party essentially had no serious chance of power. The only avenue was through education and trying to get your voice heard from one of the major parties. So, there's been a lot of advocacy for proportional representation in the U.S., but it just doesn't get traction. I think the central problem, I don't know if you have an answer to this or not, is that it's unfamiliar. That people just don't know what it would mean, what it would expect. And are there, what can you point to? How can you show people what it would be?
Right. It's unfamiliar, and we don't like the unfamiliar. And that's certainly part of the problem. The US system is quite different. Although we share the same voting system, we have a very different allocation of powers. The US system is much more balanced between the executive and the legislature. In our system, a party and a leader that has a majority of the seats has virtually unlimited power. We don't have the checks and balances that your system. In terms of, it used to be the case that US Congress people would have greater amount of freedom from party discipline and could therefore, and because of the primary, particularly in the open primaries, could speak for voters and would want to speak for voters. There's less of that because of all the gerrymandering, there are fewer districts that could go either way. And when districts are solidly Democrat or solidly Republican, in some way it curtails freedom of speech. Because, the poor congressperson who wants to get reelected must stick to the party. There's no longer freedom. That's sad. Anyway, the comparisons between our countries are very difficult to make. And there have been attempts, successful attempts, at introducing choice voting, which is at the local levels, some of the cities. And some people here will be happy with that if we get that. In the belief that that is the first step to better things to come. I don't believe that for a minute. Australia's had choice voting, or preferential ballot, also known as the alternative vote, since 1901, as I mentioned. They've never been able to break away from it. We have in Canada, in our history, we've experimented provincially in the 52-53 elections. We have the preferential We've seen it in Alberta for almost 20 years, in Manitoba. In every instance where we at one time had it, it was taken away, and we didn't progress. We went back. We went back to first past vote. And it was always the political leadership that pulled that off. They never consulted with the voters. Very important to know that history. Right? So when Andrew Coyne writes that, we should be happy to get preferential ballot because it's the first small step on the way to glorious things, I don't believe it for 1 minute. Not for a minute. Because as long as those in power have any say, we will not progress. We'll go back. Thanks.
Yeah, anyway, Nick, that was an interesting talk, but it's, you're basically just talking about tinkering with democracy. And this is a conference on liberty. And I think you're kind of, you're kind of operating under the assumption that democracy is this wonderful concept that we all agree is so great. But I'm going to reject that concept and say that you can have a democracy or you can have liberty, but you can't have both. And democracy at its very, very best is nothing more than mob rule. So it's basically illegitimate. There's no, and the reason it's illegitimate is because you're forced into it. You can't opt out. There's no mean mechanism for you to opt out, and therefore it's illegitimate because it's imposed on you. And as a result, in democracies, we've had such egregious things as in the States, they had slavery, blacks weren't allowed to marry whites, Hitler was democratically elected. In Canada, we had the First Nation people, they were denied the rights to vote, they were rounded up, sent on little reservations, and there's residential schools, the Japanese internment camps, all their property was seized. These are all consistent with democracy. They're not consistent with liberty. And there's so many lists of democracy routinely tramples on individual rights. We have prohibition of alcohol. Joey's going to talk about marijuana. If in most democracy, you don't even get majority rule. In most cases, you get ruled by a minority. So even if you have a majority that wants a certain policy, you don't get it. But the reason it's illegitimate is you've got to have voluntary consent. That's what I think.
Well, thank you for that. And it's a view I do not share. That's all I can say. I still, my faith is in the common sense of the common. And I believe that those who pay the taxes, those who are affected by decisions, should have maximum participation in making those decisions. And I believe that overall, the common folk will make fewer mistakes than if we allow an elite to make the decisions for them. But, I respectfully disagree.
Good morning. Thank you for your efforts in continuing the education process. Also from the United States, we notice in our country that politicians are often pocketized and purchased by large corporations. Those corporations instruct these people as to what to say in order to become elected, and then the reality, boots on the ground reality, turns out to be something quite different. What's our move?
Pardon me, I'm sorry. What was your question about at the end?
What's our move? How do we circumvent this process of politicians who vote for the people who put them in office?
Well, that's a difficult one. See, I believe that there should be very stringent disclosure and limits on spending. But I'm sure there are people in this room that violently disagree with that. Half the people here would disagree with that.
Disclosure's fine.
Okay, but Yeah, my own view is that money corrupts. And you have to have, to create level playing fields and to have liberty for all and not just for the well-to-do. There have to be some limits put on what you allow people to do. I hate to say that, but something you were going to say. But that's my view. You know, I love Swiss society. Right? And the Swiss have a culture where you involve people meaningfully. And they have a wonderful way of, I mean, people even approved in referenda tax increases, right? It's almost unimaginable. Where people said, no, okay, you convinced me. If you make good use of the money, we'll approve a tax increase. Right? But there is absolutely no advertising about it, period. Right? And if there is any kind of public promotion, it has to be apportioned equally to all sides of the referendum. So yeah, I love that. Maybe it's too idealistic, but that's, you know, I don't know if it answers your question. I think what's happening in the U.S. is an undermining of liberty. I don't believe that that is liberty. It is allowing some people with deep pockets to, in fact, hijack the whole democratic process. And I just cannot fathom how a Supreme Court can open the floodgates and say, oh yeah, we'll just allow this. To me, that, you know, it's allowing somebody with a sledgehammer to run amok out here in the courtyard. I find it offensive. But that's a personal reason.
Thanks for the debate. So I lost an election in high school because of we didn't use first past the post, so I'm still bitter. But my question is, as common citizens of Canada, if we do want to move towards proportional representation, but we can't actually do anything to change it, is there a legal process in which we can participate and actually put forth our opinion in a way that will, you know, force politicians to actually do something about it, other than, you know, just what they're doing now to placate, you know, people's opinions?
Well, you know, I thank you for the question. Maybe the Canadian Constitution people can help. There have been some attempts to, on the basis of the Charter and so on, to try and force this equality and so on. I mean, talk about equality. In the last election, this 2 weeks ago, right? Every 37,000 Liberal voters got one seat. How many Green voters did it take to get one seat? Over 600,000. Yeah. Look at the Conservatives. It took 56,000. Every 56,000 Conservative votes got one seat. How about the NDP? 78,000. So an NDP vote, you needed 3 NDP votes to get the same clout in Ottawa as every one Liberal vote. That's a question of inequality. I mean, it's a question of gross unfairness between the value of your votes. So yes, there have been attempts to invoke the Charter, but the courts want none of it. They said, oh no, this is something for the political people to resolve. And so far, the court challenges have not been successful. I've been at this, you know, for 20 years. I was very active, an activist for this. We have to keep this up. As long as there's injustice, we have to stand up for what is right. And you do it in a multitude of ways. So there's Fair Vote Canada, there's Fair Vote in BC, And certainly, you know, the promise of Trudeau ought to be fastened onto, and we need to just keep talking about this. Short of civil disobedience, being hauled off to jail, we might have to do that. One last question, I think. That's probably it.
Okay, great. Thanks for presenting. I would say I'm sympathetic to proportional representation in general, but there is always one thing that I've always thought that first past the post or majoritarian system that has that PR will eventually lose, and it's the fact that in first past the post you get to, sounds kind of bad, but you get to disenfranchise certain people who are very unpopular. So, for example, PR systems, as you can see, a little bit happening slowly in Scandinavian countries and in North European countries. Since they're so democratic, they allow, for example, racist parties or fascist parties or hardcore communist parties to have a say. You have a little bit of that in Israel as well, where these more extremist parties, because they can get 10% of the vote, because 10% of people are pretty extreme in one way or another, they didn't show up. They're suddenly in the government. They have a say in tax policy, immigration policy, or social policy. Isn't that sort of a benefit of first past the post that these kind of weirdos and Nazis and communists are kind of shut out because it's super difficult for them to win in one riding, whereas they could have a large 500,000 votes spread across America, but they can't get 500,000 votes in one riding. I don't know. It's a point against democracy, is what I'm saying, but it's good because it keeps out dangerous people. I don't know if you think that's a fair point or not. I'd be interested in your idea on that.
Well, you know, my response is, look, we have to allow some extremists or views that are not shared by the majority. And that's a delightful aspect of democracy. It needs tolerance. And we have to not, you know, try to rig the system so that we keep certain people out because we don't approve it. That, I'm totally against it. It just violates any notion of democracy. What I like, and I said it earlier, what I like about the single transport vote is that it's a form of proportional representation. It yields proportional results, but it puts the voters in the driver's seat. So if voters get fed up with an extremist party or views that are not acceptable, the voters will bring down the hammer on those. But you know, if they attract votes, we have to respect it. Okay, we cannot say, well, we only like this system if it delivers seats for me and my friends. Just, you know, you're either a Democrat or you're not. You either believe in people, you either believe in liberty or not. I remember being on Ray Marin's program. Ray at one time, earlier in his career, we mostly don't Ray Marin. I guess I'm getting old, but he was fairly right wing at one time, and he interviewed me on my book in 1997, many times in fact. And so he says, you know, we might elect a left-wing government if we go for this. And he says to me, well, surely you and I will not approve of that. And I said, Ray, if it's the choice of the people that would be a left-wing government, you and I ought to recognize that it's the choice of the people and welcome that for that reason. And that's how I feel. Thank you very much.
Hey guys, so just before we break for lunch, we're gonna take a group picture because you know these days picture didn't happen. So yeah, let's go on. Yeah.
So
knows where to go.
That's what I was saying. I know.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Somebody's expensive piece of stuff there. What's that temporary? Oh, no, it's not.
Sorry about that.
Cheers, Liz.
I improved independence. It's great. You gotta really get your message out there, but it's actually good. I've heard it. Yeah,
First I'm not that much of a Democrat. I'm just watch out. Really free association. Yeah.
Like, because they know, like, they know
You guys start filling the that side of the room as well? I think we can fill up the entire side.
Yeah. Yeah.
Guys, we're looking at both of you.
And maybe because of their limited number, they will never be but at least they're out there in the numbers that are not equated for people. That's the best I can do. I mean, there's no perfect system. No, and there's injustices wherever you go. In every peculiar challenge at hand. But to minimize that, I believe we need to make it the problem, we need to allocate power as fairly, as just as possible. And my objective is always be to give voice to allow the ordinary community to feel a great sense that, hey, I'm not just voting, I'm not voting for the world.
Because I mean, it is right now, I mean,
Yeah. Did you take it?
Yeah, we did. Well, we don't have a. We thought it was probably, we thought that the way to solve the problem is allow people to, whatever they want, then the society. And that was our, Loenen was saying, that's the libertarian position, is back to civil society. Let the old concept of civil society normalize. And that's, and so.
Yeah, I think Harvard, wrong.
Yeah, that goes. Well, there's two things, I mean, we can talk about two things. One thing I'll leave you to- which is a great, I think, yeah. But that, I think it's very. Go ahead.
I don't like it, but I think we that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
as a Christian, I don't like it. But as a citizen, I think they ought to really be whoever.
That's been
If you want to provide that with you. That doesn't mean terrible. No matter what.
yeah, it's. No, that's. Yeah, you know, you're right. I know that. It's like one's right. It's like. There, yeah, I'm saying. Yes. Yeah, you're exactly. Oh, yeah. Would you rather have justice developed to, not see the court right now, you want her, hopefully, that's our way. We don't want. I don't think about it. And then there's some people for doing things that are already legal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On ballot. Oh, yeah. I was, at University of Toronto, and then I was school for a while. So what's the time? We're going. How's that out? Start out. Oh, there's a meeting. There has to be some order. That's something. not compliance. Otherwise, people get but I just don't think it's simple. I'm sure I lived the air, all the smart ones. And so they have the air conditioning. Not working that. That's not the best. That's they all start every Friday. Why don't we do this already? The only ones that are involved, volunteers, a whole set of very. So, but it's only there, if you don't see that, I don't see that. I gotta be there. Yeah. Well, all I'm saying is, I asked you, why do you have You're on here, I have 16 to defend myself. We'll do it.
Yeah, that probably, really, that's the thing, yeah, you might feel the walls. It's not like, yeah, this is parents. But that's the build kind where we go, this is how, you can't really do it. Stop those times. Less free. Yeah.
And so, but
Yeah, I did it.
Oh, really?
Like, I'm gonna talk about the story.
Whereas so I think that's from a moral. Yeah, well, that's where the
Yeah,
I think it's
In terms of this, right, it's a role.
Everyone falls.
Which brings